Wind bit at his sleeves as Jacob Hayes stood in the empty nursery, oil lantern flickering against frost-rimed windows. The infant's cry pierced the pre-dawn silence, wrenching at Jacob's chest like a rusted nail. He knelt beside the crib, breath misting in the cold air. Tiny fists pounded the blanket, calling for comfort he scarcely knew how to give. The ranch house, once filled with laughter and his late wife's lullabies, felt cavernous without her voice. Jacob pressed a hand to the crib rail, knuckles whitening. "Easy now," he murmured, voice rough with grief. Each night stretched longer since her passing, each dawn colder than the last. He needed help. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've got something extra special saved just for you. Coffee hissed in the cast-iron kettle as Jacob wrestled with cloth and feed bottles. He wrapped the baby in a borrowed quilt, its patchwork a memory of hands long gone, and tried burping him against his shoulder. The child yelped and squirmed, then fell silent, eyes wide and trusting. Jacob's heart caught as he felt that fragile bond forming, lifeblood coursing through sorrow's dry vein. He ran a callous thumb across the baby's cheek, rough as leather but tender as hope. The ranch's vast fields lay beyond, cattle lowing in dawn's pale glow. The land demanded his all, and now this child needed him, too. On the porch, a cedar post bore a new board, lettered in black paint. Nanny Wanted. Apply inside. Jacob hammered the last nail with measured blow, each strike a vow to keep going. He stepped back, shadow long across frozen planks, and surveyed the main house and outbuildings. Winter winds would soon whip the plains white. He could not raise a child alone. He needed someone with steady hands and a gentle heart. With the sign now hung, Jacob donned his coat and set out for town, a letter to the supplier, sacks of flour, and a small hope for tomorrow's rescue. At the stage stop beyond the saloon, wheels creaked to a halt in a swirl of dust and straw. The woman stepped down from the coach, her skirt dusted with prairie grit. Cold dark eyes scanned the quiet street as she lifted her bonnet's ribbon, letting wind stroke her cheeks. She carried a small satchel and wore a traveler's weary set to her shoulders, an echo of loss in her posture. She paused at a hitching rail, brushing straw from her sleeve, and folded her hands before the Nanny Wanted sign nailed to the general store's door. A flutter of recognition warmed her chest. Clara poured across the boardwalk, boots ringing faintly on wood. She hesitated at the sign, her pulse thudding like distant thunder. Clarified breath misted in the cold air. She had no family left but this newborn nephew, orphaned by fever and chance. She'd ridden 2 days from the mining camps, following her sister's last letters to this ranch. Each mile weighed her grief anew. Clara drew a long breath, then lifted her chin and stepped through the door, past lures of coffee and flour tins. She tapped the counter and spoke in a quiet voice that trembled only slightly. I saw your sign." A bespectacled clerk nodded, wordless, sliding a slip of paper across the counter. "Hayes Ranch, 10 miles west." Clara tucked the note into her pocket, spine straightening with resolve. She settled her nephew in the satchel strap across her chest and pushed open the door. Outside, wind whispered across the plain, inviting her forward. She climbed into the coach's empty seat, staring west where ranch lights winked in the pale morning. Each mile carried her closer to a new beginning, and a reckoning with memories she could no longer outrun. An hour later, Clara guided the stage's direct wheel into the ranch's gate, marked by weathered cedar posts and sagging wire. Beyond, cattle lined the horizon like distant ghosts. She disembarked, soft mud sucking at her boots, and approached the porch. Her nephew stirred, cooing against a shawl that protected him from frost. Clara carried him with practiced care, stepping onto creaking planks as though recalling her sister's gentle touch. The front door stood ajar. Smoke curled from the chimney, promising warmth. Inside, Jacob laid a stray log beneath the hearth. He glanced up at Clara's silhouette framed in lantern glow, brow tightening. Her hair tumbled free from the bonnet, dark as raven's wings, and her cheeks shone with determination. She halted at the threshold, nephew cradle close, eyes meeting Jacob's war-blue stare. He rose, coat sleeves dusted with ash, and offered a nod. "You're early," he said, voice carrying equal parts caution and relief. Clara's heart hammered as she replied, "I'm here about the nanny position." Jacob stepped aside, gesturing to an oil lamp on a rough table. He settled the baby into a high-backed chair and gestured holdingly toward Clara's arms. "He's hungry," Jacob said, extending a bottle. Clara drew the quilt aside, revealing a breast. Instinct coursed through her, memory of last year's loss igniting fierce protectiveness. She fed the child, humming a lullaby no longer whispered by his mother. He closed his eyes, settling into her arms with tentative trust. Jacob watched her, each gentle stroke a reminder of his wife's hands. Clara's voice faded as the baby drifted to sleep. She placed him back in the crib, blanket folded just so. Jacob's gaze lingered on the empty nursery wall, where a portrait had hung, her face smiling in sepia tones. He swallowed the tightness in his throat. Clara turned, drawing breath as if dredging courage from a heart's glow. "He won't mind my help?" she asked, tone quiet but firm. Jacob's gaze softened. He needs someone who knows how to soothe him. His eyes flicked to the worn bedside table where a silver locket lay open, its picture missing a face. Clara crossed to that table, heart pounding. She reached out, fingertips brushing metal rim. A flicker of recognition passed through her. Her sister had worn a matching locket. She lifted it, tracing the clasp with trembling fingers. Jacob strode in, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I keep it there," he said softly. Clara met his eyes, searching for truth in their storm-tossed depths. He closed the distance, lowering his voice to a whisper. "You remind me so much of her." Clara's breath hitched. In that instant, beneath flickering lamp and quilted lullaby, a hidden bond found its first spark, one neither could yet name. Clara rose before dawn's first pale light, oil lantern in hand, and baby pressed close. The nursery door creaked as she entered, the mattress still warm from Jacob's restless night. She brushed stray straw from the crib's edge and lifted the child into her arms. His small fist patted her shoulder, cooing in soft harmony with the flicker of flame. Clara poured water from a cracked pitcher into a tin cup, warmed it over the stove's low fire, and tested it with her wrist before guiding the bottle to his lips. He drank eagerly, eyes heavy with sleep, and Clara felt the trembling quiet settle into her bones. Jacob's boot steps creaked on the porch planks. He stepped inside carrying a bundle of split oak, each log wrapped in frost-thin skin. He stacked beside the hearth and exhaled, steam curling from his mustache. Turning, he offered Clara a chipped mug of coffee, bitter as regret but warm as hope. Clara accepted it with a nod, her fingers brushing his calloused palm. The baby reached for Jacob's hand through the quilt, tiny grip firm with trust. Jacob met Clara's glance and gave a slow, grateful nod before retreating to stoke the embers into flame. By mid-morning, the kitchen table bore porridge bowls and freshly baked biscuits. Clara stirred oats in a battered skillet, steam drifting like prayer. She cracked eggs into a tin pan and folded white flour into dough for a patchwork quilt. Each piece of cloth held memory, a scrap from her sister's faded dress, another from her mother's calico gown. The baby sat nearby in a makeshift high chair, grabbing at dangling threads and squealing when cloth snapped free. Clara smiled, brushing crumbs from his chin. Beneath chores lay a quiet joy, repairing torn fabric and feeding hungry mouths, a balm for her own tattered heart. Her needle paused at a square of quilted cotton patterned in pale rose. The print matched her sister's favorite shawl, the one Helen had wrapped around them after their parents fell ill. Clara closed her eyes, memory blooming. She saw Helen's laugh beneath the oak tree, sunlight painting freckles on her cheeks. They had stitched star shapes into the blanket and offered secret promises to each other, promises that life would not break them apart. The stitch in Clara's hand jerked with longing. She pressed a scrap to her heart before slipping it back into place, stiff with both loss and love. Out in the barn, Jacob crouched before a rocking chair leg splintered at its hinge. He sanded Ruffle with worn sandpaper, each stroke whispering forgiveness. He recalled his wife's gentle hum as she rocked their son to sleep, the melody carrying across the nursery like a feather on wind. One night during a spring rain, she had brushed his hair from his forehead and whispered gratitude for every shared breath. Jacob tapped a fresh dowel into place and tested the chair's sway. It creaked back to life, a fragile echo of her touch. He wrapped a cloth around the arm, tears gathering behind his calm eyes. Clara arrived to find him cradling the chair. She placed the baby on his shoulder and smoothed his hair as he hummed. The child burrowed into Jacob's coat, small coo of comfort. Clara placed a steady hand on the rocker's back, warmth passing among them. A circle of care formed from grief's tender threads. Jacob offered Clara a nod of silent thanks. Dust motes danced in the afternoon shafts of light through barn slats as they repaired a broken fence rail together. Each loop of wire a vow to protect the life they had been given. Later, the baby's small hand emerged, reaching for Clara's finger. He grasped it with surprising strength, eyes bright with curiosity. Clara smiled down at him, heart thawing beneath his warmth. She pressed his hand to her lips and whispered, "Hold on to me." He tightened his grip, his small form a promise that grief's shadows could not swallow light entirely. In that moment, Clara and Jacob both saw their future hinge on this fragile bond, child, nanny, and baron, united in silent hope. Clara rose before dawn's first gray light, oil lantern in hand, and baby cradled against her chest. The nursery door creaked softly as she entered, its paint peeling like desert bark. She settled the infant in her arms, each coo and flutter of lashes of fragile promise. Frost clinged to window panes in delicate lace, and Clara inhaled the chill sweet air before setting a basin of water on the cast-iron stove. She poured warm water into a tin cup, testing its heat on her wrist, then guided the nipple to the baby's lips. He drank deep, soft sighs vibrating through her arms. Jacob's boot steps echoed on plank floors as he entered carrying a bundle of split oak. He stacked log beside the hearth and exhaled, reanimating embers into flame. The kettle sparked to hiss over fresh kindling. Clara accepted a chipped mug of coffee from his outstretched hand, steam drifting like prayer. She cradled the baby in one arm, lifting the cup to her lips with the other. Bitter warmth cut through sleep's fog, and Jacob stood close, shoulders squared in quiet support. The baby reached for Jacob's finger, small grasp firm, and Clara's chest ease and relief. Morning chores began with oatmeal simmering in a battered skillet. Clara cracked eggs into a tin pan greased with bacon fat, the sizzle of morning him. She stirred until the oats thickened, then ladled them into 2 bowls, one for Jacob, one for herself. The baby sat in a makeshift high chair of stacked crates, gumming at stray threads on quilt draped across his legs. Clara brushed crumbs from his chin, murmuring, "Here's breakfast," as he blinked sleep from rosy cheeks. Each flicker of contentment wove another thread between them. Nanny, father, child, forming a fragile tapestry of trust. Between chores, Clara unrolled a quilt on the kitchen table, its patchwork a map of memories. She traced frayed seams, a square of faded calico from her sister Helen's favorite dress, rose-patterned cotton from their mother's gown. As she stitched a new patch, a rush of memory carried her back to a childhood summer picnic beneath live oaks, when Helen had braided daisies into her hair and dared Clara to chase fireflies across moonlit fields. Laughter had rung free then, unburdened by debts or death. Clara's needle paused, a tremor in her hand. She pressed a scrap to her brow and exhaled, resolving to honor those bright days through every mend. In the barn alongside Jacob, Clara helped mend a sagging fence rail. She passed him fresh wire, each coil gleaming like a promise in morning sun. Jacob slipped a plank into place while Clara looped wire tight, fingers twisting until wood and metal held fast. The baby watched from the porch, expression bright as he waved his blanket in encouragement. Clara smiled and pressed her ear to his chest, feeling his steady heartbeat. Each nail she drove felt like securing hope itself. Jacob glanced at her steady hands, grief's frost thawing in his gaze. He nodded once, approval and gratitude entwined. Midday found Clara baking biscuits in a cast-iron oven heated by oak coals. She rolled dough thin on a flour-dusted board, then cut rounds with a tin cup's rim. Steam curled around her as she slid the tray inside. Jacob emerged with letters he collected in town. One addressed to the ranch, another sealed with dark wax, and Clara's name scrawled in a familiar hand. He handed it to her with a questioning look. Clara's heart tightened. She tucked it into her apron before answering. "Just business," she whispered, gathering flour from her palms. But Jacob's brow furrowed in quiet doubt. Soon after, Mrs. Lawson arrived in her buckboard, ribbons of dust marking her path. She carried a crate of flour, jars of molasses, and 2 wrapped parcels. Her bonnet and apron bore the morning's labor, and her lined face softened in greeting. "Good morning," she said, setting the supplies on the porch railing. The baby reached for a ribbon on one parcel, and Clara lifted him, letting him tug at the bright cloth. Mrs. Lawson chuckled. "A new quilt, from your mother's own loom," she explained, voice warm as hearth embers. She pressed the parcels into Clara's hands, patching some fresh squares. Clara's eyes brimmed. She cradled the gift with reverence. Mrs. Lawson lingered, eyes drifting between Clara and Jacob. "Your sister spoke often of this ranch," she said, voice low. She loved its cedar posts at sunset. Clara's heart fluttered at the mention of Helen, sharp as the quilt's needle. Jacob sipped water from a tin cup, gaze unreadable. Mrs. Lawson offered another cup, then met Clara's trembling gaze. "If you ever need help, you know where to come." She climbed back into the wagon, and the horses trotted off, leaving the afternoon quiet both filled and hollowed by her kindness. Evening settled with muted gold as Clara completed the quilt, sewing in a diamond of pale rose calico. Each stitch bound past and present. Scraps from Helen's dresses, Jacob's wife's handkerchief edged with lace, swatches from Clara's own faded skirts. She spread the quilt over the nursery chair, stepping back to admire its pattern of memory and healing. The baby coughed, small hand brushing the rose patch, and Clara pressed her lips to his forehead. In that moment, the quilt was more than cloth. It was a living record of love and loss, stitched into shelter. Later, Jacob repaired a rocking chair in the barn loft. He sanded splintered wood with weathered sandpaper, each scrape stirring dust motes in lantern glow. He remembered the night his wife had rocked their son, humming soft as breath through pine walls. He fingered a gouge in the arm where a horse had kicked. Clara found him there, infant cradled in her shawl. She lifted the baby to Jacob's arms and extended a lantern. He nodded and resumed his work with her watching over his shoulder. In the flicker of flame, they were 2 grieving souls shaping new foundations. Night fell in hush of crickets and distant cattle lowing. Clara settled the baby into his crib, draping the new quilt across him. He yawned, fists curling around the rose patch's edge. Clara pressed her hand to his chest, each breath a small victory. She turned to leave and saw Jacob standing in the doorway, face shadowed by lantern light. He held the locket gently, its missing portrait frame empty but heavy with story. Clara's breath caught. She stepped forward. Jacob's voice was quiet. "You remind me so much of her." Clara's throat tightened. She reached for the locket, fingertips brushing cool metal. Before she could speak, a stagecoach whistle split the night air, harsh, unexpected. Clara froze, heart pounding. A stranger rode westward across moonlit plains, carrying secrets tied to the locket's clasp. Clara started at the stagecoach whistle, breath catching in the lantern-lit kitchen. The baby stirred in his crib, cooing into the quiet like a small bell. Jacob laid aside his hammer, mid-repair on the rocking chair arm, and crossed to the window. Frost clinged to the panes, each flake a frozen star. Clara joined him, quilt's rose patch beneath her fingers. She felt the locket warm in her pocket, heavy with questions. The coach wheels ground gravel at the gate. Clara's heart pounded. She lifted the quilt and checked the baby's blanket, smoothing its edge with gentle care. Outside, Jacob wrapped his greatcoat tight and moved to the porch rail, hand on the rifle at his hip. Clara followed, baby cradled close, sent a soft wool and infant warmth mingling beneath her bonnet. The coach door swung open, and a man stepped down, dust coating his boots like desert ash. He wore a dust-gray duster and broad-brimmed hat edged with stagecoach grime. Clara's pulse fluttered, an omen from her sister's last letter warning of strangers bearing tidings. Jacob's jaw tightened. He scanned the man's face for threat. Clara held the baby to her shoulder as the stranger approached. He removed his hat with slow politeness, eyes steady beneath a bristle of sweat. "Pardon the hour," he said, voice gravel in caution. "Name's Travis, rider for Caldwell and Sons." He nodded toward Jacob. "Got word you're looking after the Baron's heir." Jacob's gaze narrowed. "We've managed so far." Travis shifted, glancing at Clara's locket glinting at her throat. "That necklace belonged to Mrs. Hayes?" Clara's fingers curved around the quilt's edge. She pressed the locket beneath her shawl. "It does," she said softly. Travis's eyes flicked from Clara to the gate, risk and reward playing in their depths. Jacob stepped forward. "What brings Caldwell's rider here?" His voice was low as prairie wind. Travis drew a folded dispatch from his coat. "Firm's unsettled. Rumors your late wife's sister's on the ranch. They want proof before extending credit." His words landed like lead. Clara's breath hitched. The locket pressed against her chest. She remembered Helen's vow under the oak tree to never betray family secrets. Jacob's eyes met hers, question and compassion mingling in storm-gray depths. Clara swallowed, voice trembling. I'm her sister." Travis's jaw dropped. "That explains the locket." He offered the dispatch to Jacob, who took it with measured calm. Clara stepped back as Jacob read, the dispatch demanding identity verification within days, or Caldwell would seize the ranch. The baby stirred, reaching for Clara's scarf. She set him in her arms and smoothed his hair. His tiny fist curled around the shawl's fringe, anchoring her heart. Jacob folded the paper, exhaling through his nose. "He knew of Helen," he murmured. Images flickered behind his gaze. Helen's laugh in spring sun, her hand on his arm as they branded calves together. He remembered the day she taught his son to name each calf's stripe. Her absence was a hollow ache. Clara's mind spun back to her own farewell to Helen. The day they parted at the steamboat landing, tears burning Helen's lashes. Helen had pressed a locket into Clara's hand. "Keep him safe," she whispered. "Promise me." Clara touched the heart-shaped pendant at her throat, finger tracing engraved initials. In that moment, a shared vow echoed across years and miles. She lifted her gaze to Jacob's, voice steady despite her fear. "She trusted me," Clara said. "I won't let you or him down." Jacob nodded, sorrow and relief warring in his chest. The baby cooed, sensing sanctuary in their united front. Mrs. Lawson's wagon rumbled down the lane, lantern glow bobbing like fireflies. Clara stepped forward, meeting the storekeeper at the gate. Mrs. Lawson's bonnet was dust-streaked, apron frayed at the hem. She carried a crate of bottled milk and a burlap sack. "Thought you might need this," she said, voice soft as dawn. She noticed a locket peeking from Clara's bodice and offered a knowing nod. "Helen spoke fondly of you," she whispered. Clara's throat tightened with gratitude and pain. She accepted the milk and sack, tucking the locket safely beneath her shawl. Mrs. Lawson climbed aboard and urged her horses on, leaving Clara and Jacob to their heavy joy. Together they fortified the nursery door, Jacob's rifle at Clara's back as she drove nails into the frame. Each hammer blow sealed fear away. The baby gurgled at his reflection in the lantern glass, tiny hands tapping the wood. Clara handed him to Jacob, who rocked the crib gently. His broad shoulders shifted beneath the quilt's weight. Clara bent to secure the sash on the window shutter, hands working with resolve. Darkness pressed against the glass. But inside, the lantern's glow formed a circle of safety. Night deepened, and Jacob settled the baby in Clara's arms. She hummed a lullaby Helen used to sing, words she learned by memory. Sleep, my darling, safe and warm. The baby's eyes drooped. His lashes brushed Clara's palm. Jacob pressed close, placing his hand over hers. The locket lay against Clara's heart, pulsing with legacy and promise. Clara closed her eyes, letting grief and hope entwine. She held the child as though he were all that remained and all that mattered. A sudden knock cracked the hush. Clara and Jacob both stiffened. The knocking came again, deliberate, urgent. Jacob raised his rifle. Clara smoothed the quilt's folds around her nephew. Jacob unbolted the door and opened it a crack. Moonlight spilled across the threshold, illuminating a face he recognized, Mr. Davis, the ranch's bookkeeper, eyes wide with concern. "Trouble," Davis said. He held a letter sealed with Caldwell's crest. "He's arriving at dawn with a judge in tow." Clara's heart stuttered. Davis glanced at the crib behind them, voice soft as wind through cedar. "He wants proof of kinship, or he'll take the boy." Clara's breath caught. Jacob closed the door against the night, heart hammering like a stampede. He turned to Clara, anguish and resolve flickering in his gaze. Clara pressed the locket to her lips, tears gathering as she whispered Helen's name. The ranch's shadows pressed close, and the baby stirred in his sleep, small fist reaching toward the locket's edge. In that fragile grasp lay every hope they had stitched together. Quilt, locket, and love, teetering on dawn's uncertain promise. Pre-dawn hush pressed against the ranch, heavy as a prayer. Clara moved through rooms by lantern light, each creak of floorboard a reminder of the life she now guarded. The baby stirred in his crib, cooing low as wind against frosted window panes. Jacob lingered at the hearth, stacking split oak until embers glowed like distant stars. He glanced at Clara, her silhouette calm and sure, and felt a swell of gratitude that pierced his grief. Together, they latched shutters, secured the nursery door with fresh iron, and laid fresh hay in the crib. Each act was a vow. No harm would claim his son under their watch. Clara paused by the bedside table to fingers the quilt's rose-patterned patch. Beneath the stitches lay memory. Helen's laughter spilling through summer fields, her voice carried by prairie breezes. That afternoon, they had hunted bluebonnets by the creek, racing until dusk stained the sky. Helen had grabbed Clara's hand, promise in her gaze, "We stick together always." Clara traced the pink petals she had sewn, the threads worn thin by grief and time. She pressed the quilt against her cheek, inhaling the faint scent of lavender, her sister's signature. In that whisper cotton and bloom lay both solace and sorrow. On the porch, Jacob paused to secure the locket in Clara's pocket. He remembered his wife's hand drop into her throat as they rode for branding season, the locket's cool brass warm against her skin. She had clucked softly at the newborn in his arms, murmuring lullabies she had learned as a child. Jacob had watched her, eyes alight with mother's pride, and vowed then to cherish every breath she drew. Now, oil lanterns flickered across cedar beams, and he drew strength from her memory. He offered Clara a nod, and they turned together to inspect the barn shutters. Inside the barn, Clara cooed soft encouragement to the baby as Jacob tested each bolt. The child reached for Clara's finger, tiny grip firm as promise. Clara smiled, brushing back his wispy hair. Jacob held the door steady against the wind's gusts. Each shutter clank sounded like a drumbeat in the still air, marking their steadfast defense. The baby yawned, fists curling into sleep. Clara laid him in a pile of blankets on an upturned crate, makeshift cradle but safe refuge. She covered him with the quilt, rose patch over his heart. In that moment, Clara and Jacob became more than guard and charge. They were family forged by choice. Morning light crept over the ridge as a buckboard rattled onto the yard. Mrs. Lawson stepped down, apron dusted with stagecoach grit, eyes bright beneath bonnet's brim. She bore a hamper of fresh eggs and a jug of cream. "Heard you might need breakfast," she said softly, setting the hamper beside the porch rail. Clara accepted a woven basket, gratitude warming her chest. Mrs. Lawson paused, gaze drifting to the closed nursery door. "Your sister's boy deserves a future," she murmured. Clara pressed the basket to her hip, chest tight with thanks. Mrs. Lawson climbed back aboard, horse's tail flicking farewell, leaving Clara and Jacob buoyed by community's quiet support. By midday, cloud-blotched sky threatened snow. Jacob led Clara to the corral, where a fresh layer of frost sparkled on the fence rails. "Let's reinforce," he said, knotting wire around a leaning post. Clara knelt beside him, steadying each coil as they worked in tandem. The baby sat safe on the porch, cooing at passing cattle, tiny voice bridging their efforts. Clara felt joy flicker in her ribs. Together, they could build walls strong enough to withstand any storm. Jacob fitted a new plank into place. Clara hammered the nail until it set firm. Each thud of hammer was a covenant of protection. Dusk fell swift, and the first snowflake drifted across the lantern's glow. Jacob ushered Clara inside as the wind rose to howl against the walls. He set stew bubbling in a cast-iron pot, the scent of beef and onions curling into the parlor. Clara rocked the baby in the repaired chair, humming Helen's lullaby in a quiet voice. Jacob ladled stew into bowls and joined her by the fire. Flame light danced on their faces, shadows weaving through lines of loss and hope. They ate in companionable silence, the baby's soft snores a gentle counterpoint to crackling logs. Night deepened when hoofbeats hammered on the gate. Clara's heart leaped. Jacob rose, rifle in hand. The gate swung open to reveal Caldwell himself, flanked by a stern judge in black coat and 2 deputies. Snow dusted their hats and shoulders, lending them an otherworldly air. Caldwell's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the lamplit house, then fixed on Clara standing guard. The judge unlatched a pouch and produced a writ demanding proof of kinship, or forfeiture of boy and land. The porch fell silent. Needled tension crackled like frozen sparks. Clara stepped forward, gathering the quilt to her chest and feeling the locket beneath her shift. Her voice, soft as frost-thin glass, carried across the snowfall. "I am his aunt, my sister's kin." She drew the locket free and held it aloft, brass gleaming in lantern light. The judge leaned forward, inspecting the pendant and its engraved initials. The baby stirred, small fingers reaching toward the metal's curve. Jacob backed Clara with calm resolve, rifle resting at his side. Neighbors peeked from behind shutters, lanterns kindled at windowsills. Silent witnesses to her truth. The judge slid the locket into his palm, thumb tracing the inscription. He tapped paper on his knee, voice even. "This alone does not suffice. A testament is needed." Jacob exhaled, shoulders stiff against winter's bite. Caldwell smirked, satisfaction coiling around his words like smoke. "Return with sworn witnesses at dawn, where I claim both boy and bluff." He glanced at the baby, voice dropping to threat's whisper. The law sees to it. With boots crunching on ice, he turned and stalked back to the gate, deputies behind him. Snowflakes drifted in their wake, dissolving in the hush. Clara pressed a locket to her lips, tears glinting like crystal. She rocked the baby close, heart aching with both fear and defiance. Jacob placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "We'll stand until dawn," he said, voice low as drum roll. Mrs. Lawson's wagon lights glimmered down the lane, and Mr. Davis emerged with neighbors bearing torches and petitions. Clara felt strength pool in her veins, kinship's proof woven through community's vow. The judge's words echoed in her mind, sworn witnesses at dawn. The stage was set, the dawn unknown, and in the storms Clara vowed to protect her nephew and claim her place beside Jacob, no matter the cost. Pre-dawn hush pressed against the ranch as Clara and Jacob stepped onto the porch, the baby balanced between them in a quilted wrap. Lanterns glowed pale at each post, casting long shadows across frost-hardened boards. Caldwell's foreman and the judge rode up in a flurry of steam and spurs, deputies in tow. Clara's breath formed tiny clouds as she tightened her hold on the rose-patch quilt. Jacob placed his hand on her back, Rifle slung but unused, its presence a silent vow. Together, they formed a line of protection, facing the assembled law beneath bullet-scarred cedar beams. Clara lifted the brass locket into the judge's lantern light. Its cool metal gleamed, stirring a summer memory. She and Helen at Wildflower Spring, sun-warmed stones beneath their feet, Helen's voice echoing promise as she clasped the pendant around Clara's neck. "Keep our family close," Helen had said, eyes bright as morning dew. Clara pressed the locket against her heart and spoke clearly. "My sister entrusted me with this. It proves our bond." The judge's eyes narrowed, finger tracing the engraved initials. Frosted breath fogged the glass as the baby cooed, tiny fists lifting to stroke the pendant's edge. Jacob released his breath and recalled a winter ritual he shared with his wife, laying holly sprigs on the hearth each Christmas Eve, her slender fingers weaving ribbons through cedar branches. She'd hum by firelight, singing lullabies to their son before he was born. Jacob's chest tightened at the memory. Each log he'd stacked since her passing a testament to his vow, to shelter their boy with all he was worth. He stepped forward and laid a second item before the judge, a ledger entry signed by Caldwell himself, noting his late wife's merchant account and Helen's signature as guarantor. Evidence built brick by brick. From the yard, neighbors emerged, Mrs. Lawson carrying 2 letters bound in bronze ribbons, Mr. Davis clutching a ledger with Helen's penmanship recorded beside town births, ranch hands bearing sworn statement of Helen's apprenticeship at the blacksmith's. One by one, voices wove a tapestry of truth. Mrs. Lawson recounted Helen's gentle care of orphan colts. Mr. Davis spoke of Helen's laughter echoing through the saloon when she saved Clara's wages to send home. Each testimony glinted proof. Jacob watched Clara's resolve shine beneath frost's edge as the community rallied where greed once threatened. The judge closed his ledger hinge by hinge, the snap of binding echoing like a riveted door. He placed a hand on his heart and addressed Caldwell's foreman. "Clara Porter is legally kin. The infant remains the heir." Frost turned to missing Jacob's chest as relief bloomed across his features. Caldwell's foreman scowled, lips curling with grudging respect. "Your term's honored," he growled, swinging into his saddle. Deputies mounted behind him, drumming boots on still ground. The horses' hooves faded as they retraced their arrival trail, leaving dawn's quiet ride of hope behind. Clara collapsed into Jacob's arms, quilt sliding from her shoulders like a soft cascade. The baby stirred in her embrace, small fingers grasping the rose patch with urgent trust. Jacob pressed his lips to Clara's brow, voice hushed with wonder. We stood together. Lantern light flickered across their faces, tears and triumph mingling in his eyes. Mrs. Lawson stepped forward with warm biscuits and steaming coffee in cracked enamel, offering sustenance to salvation earned. Neighbors clasped hands and nodded in solidarity, their silent vigil a testament to chosen family beyond blood. As sun breached the horizon, Jacob led Clara to the far corral where a young oak sapling, Helen's promise planted last year, unfurled fresh leaves in spring breeze. He knelt and lifted Clara's hand, guiding hers to the tender trunk. "Rooted in truth," he whispered, pressing soil around her palm. The baby toddled between them, toddling uncertain steps toward the tree, chubby hand reaching for leaf's quiver. Clara laughed, a sound bright as meadowlark, and knelt to scoop him into her lap. The oak's branches crowned them in green hope as neighbors drifted back to barns and homes, leaving behind the promise that family endures beyond grief's shadow. 1 year later, sunrise spilled over cedar fences and wild bluebonnet fields. Clara stood at the front gate, baby in her arms, now toddling in buckskins, his laughter rippling like creek water. Jacob emerged from the barn, leather satchel in hand, eyes bright with morning light. He crossed to Clara and placed his hand on her shoulder, watching their sun-chased morning dew across tilled rows. The sky blushed pink as Clara tucked the quilt's rose patch around the little one, her shawl and Helen's locket both resting against her heart. Inside the house, Clara and Jacob carved their initials, C+J+H, into a cedar beam above the hearth, each stroke of the knife of promise sealed in wood grain. Clara added a small wildflower sketch beneath the letters, a tribute to Helen's love of blooms. Jacob stood beside her, finger steady on the knife's handle, voice soft as dawn's hush. "We endure." Clara nodded, eyes shining. The baby toddled after them, chasing golden rays that danced across the boards, his small boots tapping new rhythms in the ranch's beating heart. Outside, the oak sapling had grown into a slender tree, its leaves quivering with spring's breath. Clara placed her son's hand atop its trunk, guiding him to press soil into fresh furrows where wildflowers flourished. Jacob knelt to wrap a leather strap around the tree's base, securing its future. The baby pressed his cheek to Clara's, pointing toward the sunrise. In that radiant moment, chosen family and community's embrace shone brighter than any sun. Ranch lights flickered behind them. Home, hope, and heart forever bound beneath the wide, open sky.